Welcome to Say the Question. I'm Joe, here with Sam, and today we're talking about customer service phone menus. Those automated trees that promise convenience while somehow making you work harder to reach a human.
Yeah, because the nice sounding version is that these systems route callers to the right person and improve the customer experience. The weird part is that the caller still has to sit through the maze first.
Right, so the gap is the whole story. Let's start with the obvious question. What do these menus actually do? And why does the shortcut so often feel longer? Sam, start us off.
Okay, here's the question I can't shake. Why does a phone menu keep getting updated and somehow the part that matters, getting to a human, takes longer? That's the core suspicion. The menu looks cleaner, the voice sounds friendlier, maybe the options are more organized, but the actual caller experience still feels like extra steps before anyone solves the problem.
That's the clean version of it. The first thing to separate is actual help from fake convenience. A menu can genuinely be useful if it gets simple stuff out of the way fast, but it can also be a nice sounding way to keep the hard cases away from a person for as long as possible.
So where's the line for you, Joe? When does routing become just routing, and when does it start feeling like intentional friction? Because I don't think people are imagining the problem. They just know the difference between "this helped me" and "this made me sit here listening to prompts while nothing moved."
The line is pretty simple in practice. If the system quickly sorts basic tasks like hours, password resets, order status, or simple account questions, that's a routing tool. If it makes every path feel longer and the human option keeps getting pushed back, then the routing starts looking like a barrier. The same menu can do both, which is why the argument gets messy so fast.
Right, and companies always sell that as a favor. More options, clearer prompts, better self-service, all that. But from the caller side, the story's usually simpler. I pressed 3 buttons, then 4 more, then I got told to use the website, then I got bounced again. That's why people get suspicious. They don't need a conspiracy theory to notice the process keeps protecting the system more than the person.
That's the fair suspicion. Not every phone tree is a scam, because some of them really are just trying to route calls efficiently. But if the update keeps creating one more obstacle before a human appears, you're allowed to ask whether the design is protecting the customer or protecting the company from the customer.
And that's what bugs people. The company version of the story is always cleaner than the caller version. The company says, "We improved the experience." The caller says, "I spent 12 minutes trying to get to a person." Those are not the same sentence, even if they're talking about the same menu.
No, and that gap is where the irritation becomes a real question. If the update mainly makes the company's workflow smoother, people can feel that even if they can't name the exact reason. They don't need the org chart to notice that the system is doing them a favor only after it's already done itself one.
That doesn't prove bad intent, but it does explain the reaction. Nobody likes being told something is for their convenience when the visible effect is more waiting. If the company wants credit for making life easier, the caller is going to judge that claim by whether they got help faster, not by how polished the recorded voice sounds.
And that's the useful boundary. Some of the bad experience is probably old systems, bad design, or overload, not a secret plan to ruin your afternoon. That matters because intent is not the same thing as impact. But if the impact keeps landing the same way, more steps, more waiting, more shuffling before a human, people are not crazy for reading that as a cost-saving move dressed up as help.
Yeah, that's the part I keep coming back to. From the outside, nobody gets a note that says, "Sorry, this is mostly about reducing our workload." You just get the cheerful voice, the extra menu, and the sense that your time is the thing being spent. So the real test isn't whether the menu is modern looking. It's whether it actually gets you closer to help or just makes the delay easier for the company to live with?
Exactly. If it shortens the path to a person, that's fine. If it mostly smooths over the fact that the path is still long, then people are right to notice the gap between the promise and the experience. That gap is basically the whole episode.
Before we get too tidy about it, here's why people read this as shady in the first place. The promise is speed, but the caller experience is a maze. If you're told the update is for your convenience, and then you spend 5 minutes proving you're allowed to ask a question, that doesn't feel like convenience. It feels like somebody took your annoyance, put a little logo on it, and asked you to thank them.
And that's the key thing. You don't need a grand theory for that reaction to make sense. A bad routing experience is already bad. Even if the company thinks it's reducing the wrong calls or sorting people better, the caller mostly experiences delay, repetition, and the sense that the system is protecting itself first.
Exactly. The language makes it worse because it's not neutral language. For faster service or to better assist you sounds nice, but the actual sequence is press 1, press 2, repeat your account number, confirm your zip code, choose from 3 slightly different versions of the same problem, and then maybe get transferred anyway. At some point, the words stop sounding helpful and start sounding like a cover story for making you do extra work.
That's the mismatch people are reacting to. The stated purpose is convenience, but the felt result is friction. And once the friction becomes predictable, callers stop hearing efficiency and start hearing, "We'd like you to accept a delay," without calling it one.
Right, because the menu doesn't just waste time. It also tells you, please be patient, while quietly making patience your job. And after the third prompt, you start feeling like they want you to keep circling instead of
getting to a person.
Yeah, and that's why the suspicion sticks, even when nobody can prove some evil meeting where they twirled their mustaches. You don't need a secret room for the result to be ugly. If every path is slightly longer, slightly more annoying, and slightly more indirect, people are going to assume the design is serving the company more than the caller.
Mostly because the pattern keeps teaching them that. Repeating prompts, forcing people to restate the same issue, burying the live option deeper than the first screen wants to admit. All of that makes the caller feel managed instead of helped. That feeling is not crazy. It is a normal response to being made to do administrative chores just to reach a human being.
Joe, am I overstating the motive part if I say it starts to feel intentional just because it's so consistently inconvenient? I know that's not proof, but it feels like the system is asking people to give up before they get to anyone who can actually fix the problem.
That's the fair version of the suspicion. I wouldn't jump from "this is annoying by design" to "every company is plotting to trap callers," but I also wouldn't pretend the annoyance is accidental just because the wording is polite. A system can be built around reducing contact, reducing load, and reducing expensive human time without anyone in the room saying, "Let's make this miserable."
And that's the part people feel in their bones. Not a cartoon villain, just a structure that keeps making the same request harder than it needs to be. The weird part is how often the company seems to know exactly how annoying it is and still wraps it in a friendly tone, like that fixes the experience somehow.
Which is why the polite wording matters so much. If you tell somebody this is about making things easier, then the burden is on you to make the path visibly easier, not just rename the path. If the update adds steps, adds screens, or adds another round of confirmation before the same human handoff, people are right to read that as a delay, with better manners.
So the suspicion isn't that every automated menu is evil. It's that the menu can be structured to look helpful while still pushing the hard part further away from the caller. And once you've lived through enough of those, you stop hearing the promise and start watching for the extra step hiding inside it.
That's the real issue to define next. What counts as an actual routing improvement? And what is just a friendlier label on the same old delay? Because if the update doesn't shorten the path to a human, the convenience claim is doing a lot more work than the system is.
Okay, now that the irritation is on the table, let's get boring for a second and be precise about the target. A phone menu can do a few different jobs. It can let you solve a simple problem yourself, it can route you to the right department, or it can keep you from reaching a human when the company would rather not deal with you yet.
That's the useful split. We are not talking about all automation as if a recording automatically means trouble. We're talking about the systems that claim to save you time, but still add steps between you and help. So when we say delay, we mean extra time, extra menus, or extra effort. Not just, there is a robot, therefore bad.
Right, because if I can pay a bill, check a balance, or reset a password without waiting on hold, that is just a machine doing a boring job. Nobody's morally offended by a machine doing paperwork. The annoyance starts when the machine stops being the assistant and starts being the gate.
And that's why the corporate version of the story is so slippery. They say, we gave you more options, which can be true, but it leaves out whether those options are actually faster or just more elaborate. If the caller is doing more work before a person can help, the company has saved itself effort and handed the bill to the customer.
So the complaint is not menus exist. It's menus are arranged so the easy task is easy and the hard task is hidden. That's the part people feel immediately. They do not need a white paper to know when a menu is making them bounce around. They are just trying to get to the human before the afternoon disappears.
That is the fair version. It also keeps us from overclaiming because some callers genuinely want the self-service option, and some problems really are better handled that way. A menu that saves you from waiting on hold for a password reset is not the villain. The issue is whether the system is designed to resolve the call or to postpone the call.
Joe, am I overstating it if I say the tell is whether the system respects the caller's time before it respects the company's convenience? Because that feels like the part people are reacting to, and I do not want to make it sound more dramatic than it is.
That's a good way to test it. I would just make one correction. Not every long menu is malicious, and not every quick menu is good. Some companies have clunky systems because the tool is old or the process is messy. But if a menu keeps sending you in circles or keeps asking for information a person will need again anyway, then it is not really helping the caller. It is making the caller do the company's sorting work.
So the clean distinction is between routing and deflection. Routing gets you to the right place, ideally with less waste. Deflection makes it harder to reach anyone who can actually solve the problem. And the reason people get cynical so fast is that companies use the same polite language for both, which is almost insulting in how normal it sounds.
Yeah, because for your convenience only means something if the convenience is real. If the update reduces a call from 5 minutes to 2, fine. If it turns one conversation into 8 prompts and a callback request, then the update is not convenience, it's delay with nicer wording. That is the standard we need if we want to argue honestly about it.
Exactly. So the question going forward is not whether automation exists, but whether it actually saves the caller time or just makes them work harder before a human appears. If it does the first one, great. If it does the second, everybody knows what's happening, even if the menu speaks in that soothing little voice. Okay, so the nice answer is pretty straightforward. They updated the phone menu to make things easier, route people to the right place faster, and keep simple calls from taking up a live agent's time. That sounds reasonable on paper, which is exactly why I don't trust it immediately.
That's the brochure version. And to be fair, the basic mechanics can really do that. The menu can collect keypad or voice input, sort the call, and handle some tasks before a human ever picks up. So the system isn't fake just because the language sounds polished.
Sure, but that's where the smell test kicks in. If I still have to spend longer getting to a person, then the fact that the system is doing work doesn't automatically make it convenient for me. It just means the work got moved around before I got the help I wanted.
That's the key distinction. A menu can be better at routing, better at reducing dead-end calls, and better at preserving agent time without being better for every caller in the way the caller means it. Those are different measurements, and companies like to blur them because one of them sounds flattering.
So, what part of that is actually fair, Joe? Is the company really saying this makes the whole experience better? Or is customer experience just the phrase they use because we are trying to handle more calls with fewer live people at the front end sounds less cheerful?
I think the fair version is they usually mean the system should route people to the right person or department, lower the number of pointless transfers, and let humans focus on the messier calls. That can absolutely improve the experience for some callers. It just doesn't prove the experience is improved for the caller who wants a human now and has to sit through extra layers first.
Right, and that's the part people keep stepping around. The company says better experience, and the caller hears, we've found a polite way to make you do some of the sorting work before we let you through. Not always a lie, just a very flattering description of who is actually paying the cost.
That's where the suspicion stays honest. It's not enough to say they must be deceiving people, because sometimes the goal really is simpler. Reduce wasted time on calls that can be resolved automatically. Keep the live team from getting buried, and send the hard stuff to a person who can deal with it. But the caller's lived experience is still the test, because if the menu adds steps before human help, the design is not neutral just because the motive was operational.
And that's where the language gets slippery. Better experience can mean better for the company, better for the easy calls, or better for the average call volume. It does not automatically mean better for the person who is already annoyed, already confused, and already trying to reach somebody with a pulse.
Exactly. If the caller only needs one simple thing, the menu might genuinely be faster. If the caller needs a human, the menu can feel like a toll booth in front of the thing they actually came for. And that feeling is not irrational. It's a clue that the company and the caller are optimizing for different outcomes.
So the polite claim isn't necessarily false. It's just incomplete in a very convenient way. It tells you what the company wants the system to do. It does not tell you what the caller is going to live through before help shows up.
That's the usable standard. Don't assume every menu update is a scam, but don't let "for your convenience" close the case either. The next question is what the system is actually doing before a human answers, and whether that matches the customer story they're selling.
Okay, before we just keep dunking on the phone tree, let's talk about what these systems are actually built to do. Because if all they did was waste our time, companies wouldn't keep doing it this hard.
The cleanest version is pretty boring, which is usually a sign it's real. Automated menus can handle straightforward stuff like order processing, bill payment, appointment scheduling, or just finding basic information without pulling a live agent into it.
So the official story is, we're saving you time. And the less official story is, we're saving us time. Joe, am I overstating that, or is that basically the whole trick?
It's the whole trick and not the whole trick. The better version is that companies are trying to manage call volume and preserve live agents for the cases that actually need a human, which is a real operational problem, not just a PR excuse.
Sure, but that already tells you where the tension lives. A system can be useful for the company without being fun for the caller, especially if the caller is the one with the weird problem and the menu is built for the easy ones.
That's the key distinction. The menu is good at sorting low complexity requests, and it can be bad at anything messy, emotional, or slightly off script. The more unusual the problem, the more the menu starts feeling like it's sorting you instead of helping you.
And that's where people get mad, because the company acts like the menu is a shortcut, but for the caller, it can feel like a filter. You're not just waiting, you're proving you deserve a human.
That's not an insane read. A common call flow is that the call goes into the IVR first. The system tries the self-service part, and only then does it send the caller into a queue for an agent. So the delay is sometimes built in before the person even gets to the waiting room.
And if the self-service works, nobody's complaining. If it doesn't fit your problem, you just feel like you're trapped in a machine that's very pleased with itself.
That's why the company's success metric and the caller's experience can drift apart. The company may care about queue length, live agent load, and whether the routing hands useful context to the rep so nobody has to repeat everything twice. The caller cares about one thing. Did I get help without having to narrate my life story to a robot first?
That context handoff part is the least annoying version of this, honestly. If the system already captured the order number, the appointment time, or the reason for the call and passes that along, that's actually a decent handoff.
It is. That's the part people miss when they assume every automated menu is just a delay machine. In a good setup, the pre-agent stage does some sorting, the rep gets a useful summary, and the human conversation starts further along than it otherwise would have.
Okay, but then why does it still feel like such a scammy little obstacle course? Is it just because the useful version is invisible and the annoying version is what people remember?
Mostly, yes. The useful version disappears when it works, and the annoying version is all friction and repetition when it doesn't. Also, companies get rewarded for different things than callers do. If the routing keeps the live queue from getting crushed, that's a win internally, even if the first 5 minutes feel like a hostage negotiation to the person calling about a broken bill.
That's the part I keep coming back to. The system can make sense operationally, but the burden of proving you need help still sits on the caller. So the question isn't whether the menu has a purpose, it's whether the purpose lines up with the experience people actually live through.
Right, and that gives us the honest version of it. Automation can reduce load, handle simple requests, and route context to the right person, but it can also slow access for the people with harder problems. So the hard question is not whether the system does anything useful. It does. The hard question is, who gets stuck paying for the convenience?
Okay, once the menu itself is doing the work, the next question is who actually benefits from that arrangement? Because the company keeps saying this is about convenience, but the caller is the one spending the extra time. That mismatch is where the whole thing starts to look deliberate, or at least very comfortable for the company.
That is the right place to look. The main incentive is pretty simple. Companies save time and money when more calls get handled by automation first, because fewer agents have to deal with the repetitive stuff, and the support operation gets cheaper to run. That doesn't mean every menu is built in bad faith, but the pressure is obvious.
Right, and that's the part people don't say out loud. The company gets fewer live calls to pay for, fewer people on the phones, fewer trained humans sitting there waiting for you to ask where your refund is, And the customer gets to spend their own time trying to get to.
the one person who can actually fix it.
Exactly. And if the issue is simple enough to fit the menu, sure, self-service can help. I am not mad at a password reset or a balance check. But once the problem is messy, urgent, or just outside the nice little categories the system likes, the caller is the one paying for the gap between the promise and the reality.
Okay, but where would you draw the line between useful self-service and just making people do unpaid support work?
If the menu gets you to the answer faster, that's one thing. If it keeps bouncing you around when the problem actually needs a human, that is not convenience. That's the company saying, please do the first part of our job for us, and trying to make it sound polite.
Yeah, and the reason it can look reasonable from the company's side is that not every caller needs the same level of support. Some issues are genuinely quick. Staffing pressure is real too, and high call volume makes automation feel like a compromise instead of a power play. The problem is that the compromise still moves the burden somewhere else.
And the somewhere else is the caller. Extra minutes, repeated account numbers, dropped calls, failed transfers, the whole obnoxious little tour. The CFPB warning about people getting stuck in repetitive loops with no obvious way to reach a human is exactly why people stop believing the convenience pitch. So what part of that do you think is fair, and what part is just management language?
The fair part is that automation can genuinely clear simple problems faster. That part is real. The management language is when that fact gets used to justify making live help harder to reach for everything else. Once you see that distinction, the argument gets less moral and more operational. Who saves time and who loses it?
And that's why the system survives even when everybody hates it. The savings are spread across the company, but the frustration lands on one person at a time, in private, during their lunch break or between errands. So the company can call it efficiency, and the caller can just feel stuck in a loop. Those are not the same experience.
No, and that's the imbalance that keeps it in place. One side gets a cleaner spreadsheet and fewer agents to schedule. The other side gets the wait, the transfer, and the feeling that the system is asking for patience it hasn't earned. That does not prove some grand scheme. It does explain why the design keeps showing up.
So the polite answer is, we're improving convenience and encouraging self-service. The real answer is, we're shifting the early work onto you so we can handle fewer calls with fewer people. That's not a conspiracy. It's just a business choice that looks very different depending on whether you're the one saving money or the one burning time.
Mostly, yeah. And the honest standard is pretty simple. If automation helps you get to the answer faster, it earns its keep. If it makes reaching a human harder while still calling itself convenient, people are not being irrational for getting suspicious. That is the part we'll want to test against the nicer public explanation next.
Okay, so the polite answer is always some version of, we updated the menu to make it easier and faster for customers. The real answer is usually a lot less charming. Keep more calls from reaching a human, smooth out the rush, and make the expensive part of the operation less expensive.
That's the cleaner version, yeah. And to be fair, it is not automatically a lie. Sometimes a better menu really does save people time when they know exactly what they need, and sometimes a human is genuinely the wrong first stop.
Sure, but that's the sales pitch. The caller experience is still, please listen to 6 options, then 3 sub-options, then prove you are the right kind of annoying before we let you talk to somebody.
And the nice language is doing a lot of work there. Helping customers help themselves can mean actual self-service, or it can mean we'd rather you do unpaid triage before you earn a human, which is not the same thing even if the brochure says it is.
That's the part people hear and then politely step around. Because once you say it plainly, the whole thing stops sounding like a convenience upgrade and starts sounding like a choke point with better branding.
I think the stronger version is, the system often absorbs call volume before it reaches a person. That does not mean every menu is designed by cartoon villains. It means the structure can be doing two jobs at once, some genuine routing and some demand management.
So what part of that is actually fair, though? Because if a company says we want people to get routed faster, that can be true, and it can still leave out the part where they also want fewer people reaching the front line at all.
That's exactly the split. Routing is a real function, and sometimes it's useful. Demand management is the quieter function, and that's where the discomfort comes from. The trouble is that companies put both into the same friendly sentence and hope nobody notices the second half.
Joe, am I overstating it if I say the phone tree is basically a staffing decision dressed up like a service feature? I'm not saying every company is cackling about it, but the design still seems to push the burden onto the caller.
I'd soften dressed up a little, but not the core point. The better version is that the menu often protects staffing costs and call capacity first, while convenience is the public justification. Those things can overlap, but they are not the same motive.
Right, because if the system were built around the caller, the first goal would be getting you to the right human with the least nonsense. Instead, human contact gets treated like a scarce resource to be rationed, and the caller is asked to act grateful for the rationing.
And that's where the polite story and the real story split. The polite story says, we're streamlining support. The real story, in a lot of cases, is we're trying to keep the number of expensive human conversations under control, which is not glamorous, but it is closer to what the design is doing.
Which is why the gap feels so insulting. They say, for your convenience, and the caller hears, oh, we are moving the support further away unless you can convince us you really need it. And honestly, that is a very different sentence to be trapped inside.
That's the useful version. Not every menu is evil, and not, it's all fine if the interface is friendly. Just the less flattering truth that a lot of these systems are built to reduce human load, and the customer is expected to call that convenience if the design is polite enough.
So the honest test is pretty simple. If the menu helps you get to the right place faster, great. If it mostly makes the company look helpful while making the caller do the heavy lifting, then the polite story is doing more work than the system is. Okay, so the mistake people make is acting like there's one explanation for every phone menu. Some of them are just trying to get you to the right place faster for simple stuff, and some of them are clearly built to make the human option annoying on purpose. Those are not the same thing, even if they feel the same when you're stuck listening to the same three options for the fourth time.
That's the cleaner version. Sam, are you saying the problem is automation itself or the way it gets used? Because those are different complaints. Sometimes the menu really does handle the easy request better than a person would, at least in the first minute. And if the whole call is press 2 for hours, press 3 for a balance, press 4 for a refund status, the menu is not automatically a villain.
It's the second one. I don't care if the machine is doing the boring part well. I care when it starts pretending that convenience is the whole story while quietly making the exit harder. If the automation is helping with quick stuff, fine. But if it also adds friction the moment you need a person, then the pitch gets pretty slick pretty fast.
I wouldn't go that far as a universal rule. A lot of these systems are cost control, scale, and a little convenience all mixed together. And that mix can still produce a lousy
experience for anyone who needs a human. Yeah.
Exactly. Intent matters because it tells you what kind of failure you're looking at. but it doesn't magically make the failure okay. If the system can't understand what the caller needs, or it leaves no real off-ramp to a person, then it's not serving the caller well, even if it saved the company some money. That distinction matters because otherwise, every broken menu gets described as a cartoon villain scheme. And that's sloppy too.
And that's the part people skip. They hear some of this is practical and they start acting like the caller is overreacting. But if the menu is useful for a small, simple issue and maddening for everything else, the person with the complicated problem is still standing there eating the downside. The company gets efficiency and the caller gets homework.
Right, and scale makes that look worse. A design that feels mildly helpful when a few people use it can become infuriating when everybody gets routed through it at once. Or when the system is built around the average caller instead of the actual spread of callers. One person's convenience is another person's maze, especially when the company starts optimizing for call volume instead of for the person who is already annoyed and in a hurry.
And the average caller is doing a lot of work there. The person who just needs a balance update can cruise through and think, see, this is easy. The person whose card got declined, or whose account got messed up, or who just needs someone to listen for 30 seconds, is now trapped in the same little loop. So the system looks universal from the easy end and miserable from the hard end.
That's where the polished answer gets misleading. Companies talk about reducing wait times, but if the thing they reduced is the easy to automate traffic, and the thing they increased is the time to reach a human, then the customer experience is not obviously better. The best version of the defense is not, it's all great now. It's, some callers really do benefit, and the system should still have a fast, obvious human path for the people it doesn't help.
So where do you draw the line then? Because I'm not willing to call every menu a scam, but I'm also not buying the we're improving convenience speech if the practical effect is that reaching a human takes longer, not shorter. At some point, the convenience claim stops being a description and starts being covered.
The line is whether there's a clear support path and a real human off-ramp. That's the part the better standards keep pointing at. Don't bounce people back and forth. Don't make them repeat themselves endlessly. And don't hide the only useful option behind a little obstacle course. Automation is fine when it genuinely clears the easy cases and then gets out of the way. It stops being a convenience when it becomes the only thing between the caller and help.
That's the fair version, I think. Not every phone tree is a scam, and not every automated menu is bad by definition. But if the system is only convenient when you don't actually need much help, then the convenience claim is doing a lot of pretty lying for a very tired caller. And that feels like the real test. Does this actually help the people who are calling, or just help the company feel efficient? Okay, so here's the clean version. Automation can be genuinely useful when you already know what you need, and it can also turn into a polite little wall when you need a human. Those are not the same thing, and pretending they are is where companies get slippery.
That's the useful distinction. A menu system is fine if you're paying a bill, checking a balance, or doing some boring repeat thing that doesn't need a person to think sideways.
Right, and I'm not even mad at that part. If I can punch 3 buttons and get out of there, great, everybody wins. My problem is when the company acts like the whole thing is built for speed, but the minute your issue is even a little weird, the robot suddenly gets very interested in wasting your afternoon.
That's fair, but it's still worth saying the boring operational truth. Some requests really are better handled by automation, because a human agent is overkill for them. If the system can clear the easy stuff, that can actually free up people for the cases that need judgment.
Sure, and that's the strongest case for it. Nobody wants to wait on hold to hear, Yes, your payment went through. The issue is that the same structure that helps with the easy stuff can become a gatekeeping layer for everything else, especially when the caller already knows the menu is not going to solve the problem.
Exactly. The honest version is not automation bad. It's that automation is useful until it starts pretending to be a full substitute for contact. Then the system stops being a tool and starts being a filter. And filters have a job. They keep some people out.
And callers can feel that instantly. You hear all the language about convenience, and maybe that's true for the 5% case where the request is neat and self-contained. But for everyone else, it feels like being told the front door is open while somebody keeps adding more locks to it.
I'd soften the motive a little. Sometimes it's not some grand plan to torment people. It's just that companies like anything that reduces live volume, because live volume costs money and creates mess, and automation is an easy way to absorb the routine stuff.
I buy that. But intent is not the whole story, and callers don't experience a spreadsheet. They experience being unable to get help. So even if the company thinks it's being efficient, the customer can still be stuck in a system that works great for the company and badly for the person with the problem.
That's the part I'd keep. The system can be genuinely helpful and genuinely annoying at the same time. The fair question is whether it has a real off-ramp to a human when the automated path stops being useful, or whether that off-ramp only exists in theory.
So where do you draw the line, though? If the menu gets me to the right person faster on a simple issue, I'm fine with it. But if the human option is buried 3 layers down and the system keeps acting like that's an upgrade, that starts to feel less like service and more like obstacle course design.
That's basically it. The fair version of automation answers the low-value stuff quickly and then gets out of the way. The bad version pretends it has solved access when all it has really done is move the hassle somewhere the company doesn't have to watch as closely.
And callers can tell the difference pretty fast. One version says, "We're routing you to the right place." And the other says, "Please enjoy proving you're persistent enough to deserve a person." That second one is why people get so allergic to the whole setup.
Right, and I don't think it has to be malicious to be bad. A lot of these systems are just optimized around lowering calls, shortening handle time, or making the dashboard look calmer, which is not the same thing as solving the customer's problem.
That's the useful standard then. Automation is fine when it clears the easy stuff and hands off cleanly. But the minute it starts hiding the human path, it stops being convenience and starts being a speed bump with a smile.
Exactly. And once you name that distinction, the next question is, what actually forces companies to make the handoff real instead of decorative?
Okay, so if the complaint is not really machines exist, but this machine makes me work harder than a person would, the useful question is what a less fake version looks like. Not the dream version, not the glossy marketing version, the version that actually saves the caller time and does not make them feel like they are trying to break into a building just to ask a question.
The first fix is boring, which is usually a good sign. Give people a visible human escape route. Tell them how to reach support, where that option lives, and do not make them bounce around 3 different branches like the company is embarrassed to admit a person might be needed. If there is a human available, the caller should be able to find that path without decoding the whole menu.
That alone would change the vibe immediately. If you have humans, just say so. Do not make callers play a little treasure hunt where the prize is the thing they wanted from the start, because that is where the suspicion comes from. The process feels designed to delay the obvious answer instead of helping people get it.
And the design rule behind that is simple. Stop making the caller guess which path matters most.
And stop hiding the human option until they have already been annoyed enough to accept it.
Exactly. The better version is use automation for the easy, repetitive stuff, collect the useful context once, and then hand it off cleanly if a person needs to step in. The caller should not have to explain the same problem 3 times just because the system likes separate boxes. If the machine can identify the issue and pass that along, that is real help instead of just a prettier obstacle course.
So where do you put the line? Do you start with self-service and then offer the human? Or do you put the human up front and let the menu sort itself out from there? Because I can hear the company argument already. We are trying to save everyone time. And the caller is sitting there thinking, great, then why am I still here listening to a robot explain my own problem back to me?
Probably a mix, depending on the issue. For common things, self-service can actually help if it is short, relevant, and does not make the caller hunt for the one button that matters. But if the system cannot solve the problem, the escalation should be obvious, fast, and not make the caller feel like they are being punished for wanting a person. Good design is not stubborn about keeping you in the machine. It gets you where you need to go.
And if there is a delay, say that early. Put the wait time, known outage, or backlog in the opening message if you have it. Do not make people spend 2 minutes proving the line is bad before you finally tell them the line is bad. I am fine with a system that is busy. I am not fine with one that acts like silence is a feature.
That is one of the few transparency moves that really earns its keep. It gives the caller options. Stay on, call back, switch channels, or handle it another way. That is closer to real convenience than the system pretending everything is smooth while the caller burns time and patience. The point is not to sound helpful after the fact. The point is to give people enough information that they can choose what to do next.
Right. Judge it by the full trip, not by the tone of the sign. If the automation removes steps, good. If it just reorders the irritation and makes the menu sound nicer, then the company did a branding job, not a service job. And that is the part people can feel, even if they cannot always say it neatly.
And that is the standard to keep. Visible human access. A cleaner handoff after self-service. And a system measured by total time and effort. If it reaches the answer faster and cuts the repeat explanations, it is working. If not, it is convenience in the brochure sense only. The kind that sounds good until you have to use it.
Okay, I think the answer is boring in the useful way. Some automation is genuinely helpful. Some of it saves people time, and none of that changes the basic problem. If your phone menu makes it harder to reach a human, you don't get to wave that around as convenience and act like the case is closed.
That's the fair ending. The complaint was never that every automated menu is fake or evil or whatever the internet version would be. It's that companies often describe the system from the inside, where the tree looks efficient, instead of from the caller's side, where the real question is, did this save me time, or did it just save the company from answering the phone?
And people feel that immediately. They don't need a white paper to notice that they pressed 3 buttons, listened to 2 announcements, got asked to repeat the same thing twice, and still haven't reached anyone who can actually fix the problem. The menu can be cleaner than the old one and still be a pain if it keeps moving the human farther away.
That's the distinction that matters. Automation can help with simple routing, with account lookup, with telling people the hours, the status, whatever the easy stuff is. If that shortens the path for the caller, great. But once the menu becomes a detour that the customer has to survive before the real conversation starts, the word convenient is doing more work than it deserves.
So the practical test is not whether the system has a cheerful voice and a modern app on the side. It's whether the caller gets to the answer faster. If the automation clears out the junk and gets me where I need to go, I'm fine with it. If it's mostly there to make a human harder to reach, then just admit that's what it is.
Exactly. And I'd put it even more simply. Ask what happens to the total time and effort for the caller. Not the time spent listening to the menu, not how polished the recording sounds, the actual path to a solution. If the path gets shorter, the automation earns its keep. If it gets longer, the company doesn't get credit for calling the obstacle friendly.
Joe, is there any version of this where the company gets to say, look, this saves money and handles volume, without pretending that means it's convenient for me? Because that feels like the real line. I'm not offended that businesses want efficiency. I'm offended when they sell me their efficiency as if it were my shortcut.
That's the right line. They can say it reduces cost, improves routing, handles common questions, all of that. Those are honest claims. What they can't do is take a system that delays human contact and label the delay as a benefit to the caller without qualification. If you need a disclaimer to make the promise true, then the promise was too broad to begin with.
And that's where the annoyance turns into something more specific than just complaining. The menu is not the service. It's the doorway to the service. So if the doorway is what's getting longer, slower, and more annoying, while they still call it convenient, customers are right to roll their eyes and stop trusting the label.
That's the clean version. Convenience has to earn the name by reducing friction for the caller, not by hiding friction behind nicer wording. Some automation does that. A lot of it doesn't. And once people have been trapped in a bad menu enough times, they can tell the difference pretty fast.
So that's the landing place. Automation is fine when it actually helps, and the company can absolutely explain why it uses it. But if it makes reaching a human slower, the word convenient stops meaning anything unless they add the honest qualifier. That's the whole game, really.
So, that's the end of this one. We appreciate you listening to Say the Question. Follow Say the Question, and we'll be back with another episode tomorrow.